双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
Ginx's Baby, His Birth and Other Misfortunes, a Satire, by Edward Jenkins. Critic, I never read a more improbable story in my life. Author, notwithstanding. It may be true. Contents. Part 1. What Ginx did with him. I, ab initio. 2. Home. Sweet home. 3. Work and ideas. 4. Digressive, and may be skipped without mutilating the history. V. Reasons and results. 6. The antagonism of law and necessity. 7. Malthus and man. 8. The baby's first translation. Part 2. What charity and the churches did with him. I, the milk of human kindness, mother's milk, and the milk of the Word. 2. The Protestant Detectoral Association. 3. The Sacrament of Baptism. 4. Law on behalf of Gospel. V. Magistrates' Law. 6. Popery and Protestantism in the Queen's Bench. 7. A protester, but not a Protestant. 8. See how these Christians love one another. 9. Good Samaritans and Good Samaritan tuppences. X. The force and a specimen of its weakness. 11. The unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. 12. No funds, no faith, no works. 13. In transitu. Part 3. What the parish did with him. I. Parochial knots to be untied without prejudice. 2. A board of guardians. 3. The world is my parish. 4. Without prejudice to anyone but the guardians. V. An ungodly jungle. 6. Parochial benevolence and another translation. Part 4. What the clubs and politicians did with him. I. Moved on. 2. Club ideas. 3. A thorough-paced reformer if not a revolutionary. 4. Very broad views. V. Party tactics and political obstructions to social reform. 6. Amateur debating in a high legislative body. Part 5. What Ginx's baby did with himself. The last chapter. Part 1. What Ginx did with him. I. Ab initio. The name of the father of Ginx's baby was Ginx. By a not unexceptional coincidence. Its mother was Mrs. Ginx. The gender of Ginx's baby was masculine. On the day when our hero was born, Mr. and Mrs. Ginx were living at number 5, Rosemary Street, in the city of Westminster. The being then and there brought into the world was not the only human entity to which the title of Ginx's baby was or had been appropriate. Ginx had been married to Betsy Hicks at St. John's, Westminster, on the 25th day of October, 18. As appears from the marriage lines retained by Betsy Ginx, and carefully collated by me with the original register, our hero was their 13th child. Patient inquiry has enabled me to verify the following history of their propagations. On July the 25th, the year after their marriage, Mrs. Ginx was safely delivered of a girl. No announcement of this appeared in the newspapers. On the 10th of April following, the whole neighborhood, including Great Smith Street, Marsham Street, Great and Little Peter Streets, Regent Street, Horseferry Road, and Strutton Ground, was convulsed by the report that a woman named Ginx had given birth to a triplet, consisting of 2 girls and a boy. The news penetrated to Dean's Yard and the ancient school of Westminster. The dean, who accepted nothing on trust, sent to verify the report. His messenger, bearing a bundle of baby clothes from the dean's wife, who thought that the mother could scarcely have provided for so large an addition to her family. The schoolboys, on their way to the playground at Vincent Square, slyly diverged to have a look at the curiosity, paying 6pence a head to Mrs. Ginx's friend and crony, Mrs. Spittle, who pocketed the money, and said nothing about it to the sick woman. This birth was announced in all the newspapers throughout the kingdom, with the further news that Her Majesty the Queen had been graciously pleased to forward to Mrs. Ginx the sum of £3. What could have possessed the woman, I can't say. But about a 12-month after, Mrs. Ginx, with the assistance of 2 doctors hastily fetched from the hospital by her frightened husband, nearly perished in a fresh effort of maternity. This time 2 sons and 2 daughters fell to the lot of the happy pair. Her Majesty sent £4. But whatever peace there was at home, broils disturbed the street. The neighbors, who had sent for the police on the occasion, were angered by a notoriety which was becoming uncomfortable to them, and began to testify their feelings in various rough ways. Ginx removed his family to Rosemary Street, where, up to a year before the time when Ginx's baby was born, his wife had continued to add to her offspring until the tale reached 1 dozen. It was then that Ginx affectionately but firmly begged that his wife would consider her family ways, since, in all conscience, he had fairly earned the blessedness of the man who hath his quiver full of them, and frankly gave her notice that, as his utmost efforts could scarcely maintain their existing family, if she ventured to present him with any more, either single, or twins, or triplets, or otherwise, he would most assuredly drown him, or her, or them in the water and take the consequences. 2. Home. Sweet home. The day on which Ginx uttered his awful threat was that next to the one wherein number 12 had drawn his first breath. His wife lay on the bed which, at the outset of wedded life, they had purchased second-hand in Strutton Ground for the sum of 9s. 6d. Second-hand. It had passed through, at least, as many hands as there were afterwards babies born upon it. 12th or 13th hand. A vagabond, botched bedstead, type of all the furniture in Ginx's rooms, and in numberless houses through the vast city. Its dimensions were 4 feet 6 inches by 6 feet. When Ginx, who was a stout navvy, and Mrs. Ginx, who was, you may conceive, a matronly woman, were in it, there was little vacant space about them. Yet, as they were forced to find resting places for all the children, it not seldom happened that at least one infant was perilously wedged between the parental bodies, and latterly they had been so pressed for room in the household that 2 younglings were nestled at the foot of the bed, without footboard or pillows. The lodgment of these infants was precarious, since any fatuous movement of Ginx's legs was likely to expel them head first. However, they were safe, for they were sure to fall on one or other of their brothers or sisters. I shall be as particular as a valuer, and describe what I have seen. The family sleeping room measured 13 feet 6 inches by 14 feet. Opening out of this, and again on the landing of the 3rd floor, was their kitchen and sitting room. It was not quite so large as the other. This room contained a press, an old chest of drawers, a wooden box once used for navvy's tools, 3 chairs, a stool, and some cooking utensils. When, therefore, one little Ginx had curled himself up under a blanket on the box, and 3 more had slipped beneath a tattered piece of carpet under the table, there still remained 5 little bodies to be bedded. For them an old straw mattress, limp enough to be rolled up and thrust under the bed, was at night extended on the floor. With this, and a patchwork quilt, the 5 were left to pack themselves together as best they could, so that, if Ginx, in some vision of the night, happened to be angered, and struck out his legs in navvy fashion, it sometimes came to pass that a couple of children tumbled upon the mass of infantile humanity below. Not to be described are the dinginess of the walls, the smokiness of the ceilings, the grimy windows, the heavy, ever-murky atmosphere of these rooms. They were 8 feet 6 inches in height, and any curious statist can calculate the number of cubic feet of air which they afforded to each person. The other side of the street was 14 feet distant. Behind, the backs of similar tenements came up black and cowering over the little yard of number 5. As rare, in the well thus formed, was the circulation of air as that of coin in the pockets of the inhabitants. I have seen the yard. Let me warn you, if you are fastidious, not to enter it. Such of the filth of the house as could not, at night, be thrown out of the front windows, was there collected, and seldom, if ever, removed. What became of it? What becomes of countless such accretions in like places? Are a large proportion of these filthy atoms absorbed by human creatures living and dying, instead of being carried away by scavengers and inspectors? The 45 big and little lodgers in the house were provided with a single office in the corner of the yard. It had once been capped by a cistern, long since rotted away. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The street was at one time the prey of the gas company, at another, of the drainage contractors. They seemed to delight in turning up the fetid soil, cutting deep trenches through various strata of filth, and piling up for days or weeks matter that reeked with vegetable and animal decay. One needs not affirm that Rosemary Street was not so called from its fragrance. If the Ginxes and their neighbors preserved any semblance of health in this place, the most popular guardian on the board must own it a miracle. They, poor people, knew nothing of sanitary reform, sanitary precautions, zymotics, endemics, epidemics, deodorizers, or disinfectants. They regarded disease with the apathy of creatures who felt it to be inseparable from humanity, and with the fatalism of despair. Gin was their cardinal prescription, not for cure, but for oblivion. Sold everywhere. A score of palaces flourished within call of each other in that dismal district garish. Rich-looking dens, drawing to the support of their vulgar glory, the means, the lives, the eternal destinies of the wrecked masses about them. Veritable wreckers they who construct these haunts, viler than the wretches who place false beacons and plunder bodies on the beach. Bring down the real owners of these places, and show them their deadly work. Some of them leading philanthropists, eloquent at missionary meetings and Bible societies, paying tribute to the Lord out of the pockets of dying drunkards, fighting glorious battles for slaves, and manfully upholding popular rights. My rich publican, forgive the pun, before you pay tithes of mint and cumin, much more before you claim to be a disciple of a certain Nazarene. Take a lesson from one who restored fourfold the money he had wrung from honest toil. Or reflect on the case of the man to whom it was said, "Go sell all thou hast, and give to the poor." The lips from which that counsel dropped offered some unpleasant alternatives, leaving out one, however, which nowadays may yet reach you, the contempt of your kind. 3. Work and ideas. I return again to Ginx's menace to his wife, who was suckling her infant at the time on the bed. For her he had an animal affection that preserved her from unkindness, even in his cups. His hand had never unmanned itself by striking her, and rarely indeed did it injure anyone else. He wrestled not against flesh and blood, or powers, or principalities, or wicked spirits in high places. He struggled with clods and stones, and primeval chaos. His hands were horny with the fight, and his nature had perhaps caught some of the dull ruggedness of the things wherewith he battled. Hard, and with a will had he worked through the years of wedded life. And, to speak him fair, he had acted, honestly, within the limits of his knowledge and means, for the good of his family. How narrow were those limits! Every week he threw into the lap of Mrs. Ginx the 18 or 20 shillings which his strength and temperance enabled him continuously to earn, less 6 pence reserved for the public house, whither he retreated on Sundays after the family dinner. A dozen children overrunning the space in his rooms was then a strain beyond the endurance of Ginx. Nor had he the heart to try the common plan, and turn his children out of doors on the chance of their being picked up in a raid of Sunday school teachers. So he turned out himself to talk with the humbler spirits of the dragon, or listen sleepily while alehouse demagogues prescribed remedies for state abuses. Our friend was nearly as guiltless of knowledge as if Eve had never rifled the tree whereon it grew. Vacant of policies were his thoughts, innocent he of ideas of statecraft. He knew there was a queen. He had seen her. Lords and commons were to him vague deities possessing strange powers. Indeed, He had been present when some of his better-informed companions had recognized with cheers certain gentlemen, of whom Ginx's estimate was expressed by a reference to his test of superiority to himself in that which he felt to be greatest within him. I could lick M with my little finger, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister. Little recked he of their uses or abuses. The functions of government were to him Asian mysteries. He only felt that it ought to have a strong arm, like the brawny member wherewith he preserved order in his domestic kingdom, and therefore generally associated government with the police. In his view, these were to clear away evildoers and leave everyone else alone. The higher objects of government were, if at all, outlined in the shadowiest form in his imagination. Government imposed taxes that he was obliged to know. Government maintained the parks. For that he thanked it. Government made laws. But what they were, or with what aim or effects made, he knew not, save only that by them something was done to raise or depress the prices of bread, tea, sugar, and other necessaries. Why they should do so he never conceived. I am not sure that he cared. Legislation sometimes pinched him, but darkness so hid from him the persons and objects of the legislators that he could not criticize the theories which those powerful beings were subjecting to experiment at his cost. I must, at any risk, say something about this in a separate chapter. 4. Digressive, and may be skipped without mutilating the history. I stop here to address any of the following characters. Should he perchance read these memoirs, you, Mr. Statesman, if there be such, Mr. Pseudo-Statesman, Placeman, Party Leader, Wirepuller, Mr. Amateur Statesman, Dilettante Lord, Civil Servant, Mr. Clubman, Literateur, Newspaper Scribe, Mr. People's Candidate, Demagogue, Fenian Spooter, or whoever you may be, professing to know aught or do anything in matters of policy, consider what I am sure you have never fairly weighed, the condition of a man whose clearest notion of government is derived from the police. Imagine one who had never seen a polyp trying to construct an ideal of the animal, from a single tentacle swinging out from the tangle of weed in which the rest was wrapped. How then any more can you fancy that a man to whose sight and knowledge the only part of government practically exposed is the strong process of police, shall form a proper conception of the functions, reasons, operations, and relations of government, or even build up an ideal of anything but a haughty, unreasonable, antagonistic, tax-imposing force? And how can you rule such a being except as you rule a dog, by that which alone he understands the dog-whip of the constable, given in a country a majority of creatures like these? And surely despotism is its properest complement. But when they exist, as they exist in England today, in hundreds of thousands, in town and country, think what a complication they introduce into your theoretic free system of government. Acts of Parliament passed by a freely elected House of Commons and an hereditary House of Lords under the threats of freely electing citizens, however pure in intention and correct in principle, will not seem to him to be the resultants of every wish in the community so much as dictations by superior strength. To these the obedience he will render will not be the loving assent of his heart, but a begrudged concession to circumstance. Your awe-invested legislature is not viewed as his friend and brother-helper, but his tyrant. Therefore the most natural bent of his workman-statesmanship a rough, bungling affair will be to tame you who ought to be his counselor and friend. When he finds that your legislative action exerts upon him a repressive and restraining force, he will curse you as its author, because he sees not the springs you are working. Should he even be a little more advanced in knowledge than our friend Ginx, and learn that he helps to elect the Parliament to make laws on behalf of himself and his fellow citizens, he will scarce trust the Assembly which is supposed to represent him. Will he, like a good citizen and a politic, accept with dignity and self-control the decision of a majority against his prejudices? Or will he not regard the whole Wittenagemot with suspicion, contempt, or even hatred? See him rush madly to Trafalgar Square meetings, Hyde Park demonstrations, perhaps to Lord George Gordon riots, as if there were no less perilous means of publishing his opinions. Their wily men may lead his unconscious intellect, and stir his passions, and direct his forces against his own and his children's good. Did it ever occur to you, or any of you, how many voters cannot read, and how many more, though they can read, are unable to apprehend reasons of statesmanship? That even newspapers cannot inform them, since they have not the elementary knowledge needed for the comprehension of those things which are discussed in them. Nay, that, for want of understanding the same, they may terribly distort political aims and consequences? Might it not be worthwhile for you, gentlemen, may it not be your duty to devise ways and means for conveying such elementary instruction by good street preachers on politics and economy, or even political Bible, women or colporteurs, and so to make clear to the understanding of every voter what are the reasons and aims of every act of legislation, home administration, and foreign policy? If you do not find out some way to do this, he may turn round upon you, I hope he may, and insist on annually elected parliaments, and thus oblige ambitious statemongers, in the rivalry of place, to come to him and declare more often their wishes and objects. Other attractions may be found in that solution, such as the untying of some knots of electoral difficulty, and removing incitements to corruption. £10,000 for 1 year's power were a high price even to a contractor. Think then whether at any cost some general political education must not be attempted, since there is a spirit breathing on the waters, and how it shall convulse them is no indifferent matter to you or to me. Everywhere around us are unhewn rocks stirred with a strange motion. Leave these chaotic fragments of humanity to be hewn into rough shape by coarse artists seeking only a petty profit, unhandy, immeasurably impudent, or dress them by your teaching which is the highest, noblest, purest, most efficient function of government, which ought to be the most lofty ambition of statesmanship, to be civic cornerstones polished after the similitude of a palace. V. Reasons and resolves. Ginx has been wading through 3 chapters to explain his truculence upon the birth of his 12th child. Much explanation is not necessary. When he looked round his nest and saw the many open mouths about him, he might well be appalled to have another added to them. His children were not chameleons, yet they were already forced to be content with a proportion of air for their food. And even the air was bad. They were pallid and pinched. How they were clad will ever be a mystery, save to the poor woman who strung the limp rags together and him who watched the noble patience and sacrifice of a daily heroism, of her own unsatisfied cravings, and the dense motherly horrors that sometimes brooded over her while she nursed these infants. Let me refrain from speaking, since if as vividly depicted as they were real, you, madam, could not endure to read of them. Her poor, unintelligent mind clung tenaciously to the controverted aphorism, "Where God sends mouths, he sends food to fill them," believing that there was a God, and that he must be kind,